Hello and welcome to the MovieKing Podcast. My name is David Jurmann and I'll be your host. On today's episode, I'm going to review the film Superman. So right off the bat, I'm just going to say that Superman was my most anticipated movie of the whole year, because not only is Superman one of, if not my favorite comic book character of all time, but it's also functioning as a reset for DC, who has been underperforming, to say it lightly. A few years ago, they had flop after flop after flop after flop with Shazam 2, The Flash, Blue Beetle, and then Aquaman 2. I actually did enjoy Blue Beetle, and I thought The Flash was pretty decent for what it was, but, I think overall it was a very disappointing year for DC that kind of showed they didn't have it anymore. Even whatever, goodwill they had left with people was just kind of gone because nobody was showing up for these movies, especially in the US. And I think that just really showed DC needed a reset. So the DC brand had been in shambles because of very controversial films that were unable to unite critics and audiences alike. And additionally, Warner Brothers was largely responsible for meddling with a lot of the movies instead of trusting the filmmakers to do their own thing. Because as we famously had with Batman v Superman, where the movie was kind of just restructured in post, so you had 30 minutes missing, and I think that Ultimate Edition is a much better version of the same thing. You had Suicide Squad, which just had a new editing team completely redo the film and is very different from apparently what the director intended. And then you have the very infamous Justice League cut, from Joss Whedon back in 2017, which, after a tragic incident with Zack Snyder, the original director, they got Joss Whedon to take over and remake kind of a bit of the movie, and it's a very different cut from what Zack Snyder intended, and just didn't go over well with audiences. So because of all that, it's no surprise that DC's brand in the film division was dying. And at the time, a few years back, the new Warner Brothers regime wanted to make significant changes to the franchise and hopefully revive it from the dead. So in late 2022, James Gunn and Peter Safran were hired to be co-CEOs of DC Studios, a new studio that would operate by itself and not under the control of Warner Brothers, similar to Marvel Studios, where they are technically under the umbrella of Warner Brothers or Disney in Marvel's case, but they don't work for the company exactly. They're kind of doing their own thing, delivering to the top bosses, and then, hopefully it's just a good working relationship from there where they can kind of do their own thing and be in control separately. And the co-CEOs made a few promising announcements going forward. One is that no project would go into production until there was a finished and well-liked script. Two is that it would be a lot more cohesion and unity between different projects. And three is that despite many projects taking place under the same universe, no homework would be required to understand them, and they would all have different tones. For example, Superman is a very lighthearted film, but next year we're getting Clayface, which is a horror movie. So I think that's really cool that we're getting such different varieties in tone. It's really like the comics in that sense, where you just have very different voices injecting different things into this whole universe. But also around the time that the co-CEOs were announced to take over, James Gunn announced that he would be writing and directing a new Superman movie for this new DCU. And I was actually a little unsure at the time if Gunn was even the right fit, because he typically is known for his more edgy and off-kilter humor, even while toned down for his Guardians of the Galaxy movies. For Marvel, the humor isn't exactly something that I could just imagine working in a Superman film, because it's usually a little more kind of lowbrow, gross-out humor. Not in poor taste, but it's just not really like Superman, It doesn't really scream Superman. It screams more like quirky, Guardians of the Galaxy. And for the Suicide Squad, it's a very raunchy type of humor. And that's, different maybe from even his horror stuff in the past, which is also usually kind of more edgy. So, I don't know, it just didn't sit completely right with me, but I still wanted to give him a chance to see what he could do, because he really hasn't struck out yet. I mean, especially with comic book movies, I would say he's made only good things. He has not missed once. I know some people don't love Peacemaker, but I think, just everything with TV shows, films, I think he's done a good job. And then when the trailers came out for this film, I thought they looked amazing. So I was super, super, super excited, pun intended. And now having seen the movie, Did the movie meet my high expectations? Well, the answer to that is actually yes. Simply put, Superman is a pure delight. This is some of the most fun I've had watching a comic book movie since, I want to say, at least Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, which, by the way, is probably still my favorite movie of the decade so far, so highly recommend checking that out. And in general, this is probably the most I've smiled during a movie in a while, too. Because not only did James Gunn make a movie that feels distinctly Superman in its story, tone, and vibe, but he also made what is without a doubt one of the most comic booky movies I've ever seen. And what does that mean exactly? Well, more or less, it feels like picking up a random Superman comic and reading it. Even as the proper introduction to this new DCU, it doesn't have any indication of an origin story. And in some ways, this movie feels like a sequel to another movie or the end of the first act of a movie. The film starts in a very unexpected place, but in a lot of ways, that's how a comic book is too. Like, you kind of just pick up a comic, it just starts right out of the gate, and you just kind of follow this journey through several issues, and then you kind of conclude the story, and that's how this movie feels in a lot of ways. So the movie wastes no time setting things up, and for the most part, you pick things up as you go along. The film also has an abnormal structure to it. Most movies feel like they have 3 acts, and this movie doesn't really do that. In fact, I would say I think a lot of this movie feels like reading separate issues from a larger comic, in that the way things happen in this movie is very episodic, kind of like a TV show, because Superman deals with one thing in this part of the film, and then shortly after, there's another big thing that happens he has to deal with in another part of the film. It's very much like a chapter segment. I actually think I read that initially there was a cut of this movie that actually did kind of have different chapters for different days of the week in the film, and I think that might have given the audience a better idea that, like, oh, this is very much an episodic film, but they took that out. I think it still works. Like, they kind of cut to black a few times, you can kind of tell, like, it's a different day or whatever it is. So it works. And the events in this movie are generally all somewhat related, but it's not in a way that a movie usually is. Like, it doesn't have a complete, like, flow in the story as much as it's just kind of like we're jumping from one thing to the next, but it works. Like, it doesn't feel jarring, it doesn't feel like, doesn't feel sloppy. I think some people said this movie does feel like unfocused to them. I wouldn't say it feels unfocused, it just feels very chaotic, I guess. And then additionally, this movie feels very comic booky because of how much it leans into the weird and wild. Like, why are there robots in this Superman movie? Don't ask. Why is there a big kaiju destroying the city? Doesn't matter. Why do the people in Metropolis look like this has happened a million times before? Probably because it has. But anyway, back to the film. I think James Gunn just did an excellent job writing and directing it. As I said, it feels distinctly Superman in that it's a story of someone who wants to do good and be kind in a world where kindness is misunderstood and considered old-fashioned. And it's about how your choices and actions define who you are, more than what anyone may say about you. No matter what the world may say about you, it's how you respond to that and what you do that matters. And the way you give people hope, that's what matters. In a lot of ways, I think this is a movie we actually really need right now. It's very hopeful and optimistic. It wears its heart on its sleeve, and it shows how cool it is to be a good person. It's very punk rock to be a good person. And I also love how much this movie focuses on Superman actually trying to save lives. He's always looking out for people and asking if they're okay. When damage is happening, like, he's really trying to avert the violence away. Like, he's trying to really take the violence away from them. And he also looks out for the lives of all living things, including animals and monsters. And some people may say it's very silly, like, why is Superman saving the squirrel? But it's like, to me, I think that's just getting the character. This is a person who just cares about everyone. He's not just about, he's not just about saving America or saving himself or saving other superheroes or whatever. He's looking out for everything on Earth, no matter what they may be, no matter even if he doesn't like them or not. He's still trying to look out for them. And I love that about Superman. And it's really just a great contrast to Lex Luthor in this movie, who is so focused on killing Superman that he'd willingly kill every other person on Earth to do it. Maybe even in the universe to do it. And I thought that was really cool. David Cornsweet is a great Superman. He finds a way to channel Christopher Reeve's optimistic and lovable energy. And he kind of makes it a little more modern and punk rock. I think he just did a really great job kind of taking a little bit from every other iteration of Superman, but still doing his own thing with it. Rachel Brosnahan is an excellent Lois Lane. She does a great job in her scenes, especially when she needs to challenge someone. And there's this one interview scene with her and Superman that I just thought was one of the best scenes in the entire movie. It's just them talking, and I think Rachel Brosnahan really did a great job of challenging Superman in a way that he wasn't comfortable with, and I think Cornsweet responded brilliantly to that. Both of them have fantastic chemistry. Nicholas Hoult is a compelling Lex Luthor. He's not exactly what I expected, but I did really enjoy his performance and this take on the character. Upon reflection, I actually do think that he's very much like the Lex Luthor in the All-Star Superman comic, which I was reading a while back once James Gunn kind of said that was the inspiration for this movie, and I would say you can definitely see the Lex Luthor inspiration at least. And I'll say this, Lex Luthor in this movie is easily one of the most hateable villains in a comic book movie. You just really want him to get what's coming to him, and that's the sign of a good villain. The rest of the cast does a very good job. There's a very large ensemble here, so I'm not going to name everybody, but in general, the supporting cast is impressive and brings a lot of personality to the film. Everyone just brings something different, and I appreciated that. Eddie Gathegi as Mr. Terrific is a major standout, though. He was excellent, and I can't wait to see more of his character in the future. I loved his action sequence, and as for the action in general, it's just as cool as I hoped it would be. James Gunn has largely perfected his stylish approach that he began using in the Suicide Squad, then moved into the Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and now uses it here too. And I think it's really cool. It's just so different from what any other filmmaker is doing right now, and I think it just kind of brings it to James Gunn's signature look. If you watch a James Gunn movie now, I think you could totally say yes, that is 100% a James Gunn movie. Whereas before, it still felt very James Gunn, but you couldn't really, it didn't have a signature visual look to it. Now there's a very clear look to it, the same way, you could say Zack Snyder or Edgar Wright or, whoever it may be. Some people just have a very signature look. Some people just have a very signature look, and I would say James Gunn definitely has that now. The visual effects are top-notch. Even some shots that I was pretty convinced were CGI have been proven to actually be shot in camera, or at least have a human in camera. And then the things that are very clearly CGI look surprisingly realistic, like Crypto the dog and the big kaiju monster. There's a lot of detail on them, and I wasn't taken out of the film at any point being oh yeah, that's 100% a CGI animal or creature. And as for the score, I also really enjoyed it by John Murphy and David Fleming. It uses a bit of the John Williams theme a lot during triumphant moments, and I feel like everyone kind of agrees John Williams' theme is the definitive Superman theme. The one from Hans Zimmer in Man of Steel is also quite good. A lot of people really like the one from the animated series from back in the day. I think it's an okay theme. I don't love it. But definitely the John Williams theme was used very well here. And then there's this other new theme that is very simple but epic in this film, and I'd love that to be this Superman's main theme going forward. I've heard a lot of people say that the tone in this movie is a bit all over the place, and it is going for a lot of different things, but I think it works. When the movie wants to be silly and comedic, I think it's very funny and doesn't undercut emotion. When the movie wants to be serious and heartfelt, I think it's genuinely emotional and moving. And when the movie wants to be epic, I was on the edge of my seat and was often geeking out. I think it's just so fun. It's so moving. I mean, there's this one scene with, Clark Kent's parents, specifically Jonathan Kent, and they're talking, and I was, surprised at how much it was moving me. There was one point where I was, kind of holding tears back a little bit. I was like, wow, this is really good. And the tone is just, it goes to so many different things. I mean, you go from that to, this crazy epic thing happening in the next scene, and before that, it's, the silliest thing. It's a lot going on tonally, and I think a less experienced director would make it feel very jarring, but I didn't feel that. I thought it was very natural for the most part. And it's just, again, very comic booky. It feels like it all kind of works together. The weirdness doesn't combat the grounded parts, and I think that's what James Gunn has really mastered throughout his career. But I would say the movie can feel like a lot at times, and that is perhaps my only real issue with the film. It kind of feels like just about every character has stuff to do at times, but sometimes less is more. I think like there's maybe a few too many subplots going on. Like you have like several different teams doing different things. It gets a little overwhelming by the end. I mean, there's few points where I was like, I feel like maybe you could have just kind of, you know, cut this out or just lessened what was going on here and just keep the focus on everyone else a little more. And especially the first time I watched the movie, the pacing felt like a bit of a roller coaster because of the abnormal structure of the story. Because there's not really a 3-act structure, it just kind of felt like, where are we in the movie right now? Like, are we in the second half? Are we at the end? Like, I'm a little unsure where we are, and that threw me off a little bit, but I think on repeat viewings that will improve a lot. And there's one subplot with Jimmy Olsen in particular that I thought was fun and was actually more well executed than I imagined it would be, but it probably didn't need to be in the film. I think you could have probably gotten rid of it and it wouldn't have changed much as a whole. But we'll see. I mean, maybe if they do something with it in the future, that'll make me feel a little better about it. We'll see. But as a whole, I have to say that I am very pleased with Superman. It's not necessarily the deepest or most thought-provoking or the most complex comic book movie out there, but it's not trying to be. It's not attempting to be the Batman or Logan or even Thunderbolts. It's just trying to be a movie that people can be very entertained by, take something away from, and hopefully come away a little happier and more hopeful about the world than they were when they walked in. And I think that's just really great, you know? I think we can have fun movies. I think there's a very big difference between a fun movie and a turn your brain off movie. You know, like a turn your brain off movie is not a good feeling. Like you shouldn't have to do that. That's what like Fast and Furious is, or like the Jurassic World movies. Like you shouldn't have to turn your brain off. Superman is not a movie you need to turn your brain off with because it is kind of, it still has enough going on and it still has plot and character and story and all that good stuff. But it's just purely fun. It's not trying to be anything more than that. It's just a really good time. And I had a great time being in this new DCU that James Gunn created. It's breathing with life and already has several characters that I'm invested in and want to see more of in the future. Gunn is just so clearly passionate about comics and the characters in them. And to me, that deep level of care and excitement and passion just translates right off the screen and makes this a film I want to revisit over and over and over again. I can't wait to see where the DCU goes next, but even for right now, I just think this is a great start. Really optimistic about everything going forward, and definitely this is like one of the movies this year that I'm going to be the most hyped over, just like rewatching and getting to see again. Definitely see this one on the big screen, especially in a format like IMAX or Dolby or 4DX, where you can get the biggest impact from those great flight scenes and the action sequences. So I'm going to rate Superman an A-. It's by no means a perfect film, but with the amount of fun I had watching it, it's hard not to love. And that about does it for this episode. If you want to follow my reviews, you can find me on Letterboxd at MovieKing1224. You can also listen to this podcast on your favorite apps such as Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Music. If you have any comments or feedback, I would love to hear it and improve the show. And of course, if you've enjoyed this episode, please consider liking, subscribing, and hitting the notification bell to hear more like it. I appreciate you all so much for listening, and I'll talk to you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.